Yep, I'm Mike Driscoll. As James has stated, I'm going to talk to you about creating GUIs with PySimpleGUI. So he already gave me a good introduction. I just going to throw a couple links up here. I've been writing about Python for over 10 years on my own blog, and a couple years ago I joined Real Python as a contributor. So I occasionally will contribute articles to their website. They're really good, and they have a really good editorial process. And if you like to write about Python, you can totally go there. They're always looking for new content writers. And as James mentioned, I like to write Python books. I currently have 10 of them now. So if you want to learn about Python, you can go to my blog, pythonlibrary.org, and check them out. So let's talk about PySimpleGUI. So PySimpleGUI is basically a wrapper around the major desktop GUI frameworks in Python. Now, you may not know this, but Python comes with a GUI in the standard library called tkinter. Tkinter is based on Tcl, which is another programming language. And if you install Python on Windows, you'll definitely have tkinter. If you install it yourself on Linux or Mac, you'll probably have tkinter. But sometimes it's like a separate install that you have to install as kind of an extra. It doesn't come with the system Python, unfortunately. I understand why, but it's confusing when you go, to Python's website and the documentation, it says import tkinter, and it doesn't work on Linux. Linux is system Python, even though it ought to. Anyway, so PySimpleGUI wraps tkinter, and it wraps it almost entirely. And what that means is that you can use all of the widgets, all of the buttons and combo boxes and everything else that tkinter has in it from PySimpleGUI. But PySimpleGUI goes beyond that. It also wraps PySide and DebXPython and Remy. And these other ones, PySide and DebXPython especially, are like the three big desktop GUI that you can use in Python. And they all have their own, pros and cons. But PySide is basically kind of a more open sourcey version of PyQt. DebXPython is the only GUI desktop toolkit that uses native widgets whenever possible, whereas PySide, PyQt tries to draw them itself. And the difference between having like native widgets and drawn widgets like tkinter and PySide is that tkinter and PySide makes it really easy to theme your widgets, so you can make it look maybe like Winamp, make your buttons look crazy cool or unique, but they won't look native. And so if you're targeting that native look, DebXPython would probably be more up your alley. But since if you happen to use PySimpleGUI, you can just change your import, and then you have DebXPython. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. But let's just keep going so I don't run out of time. Okay. So like I mentioned, PySimpleGUI wraps the entirety of tkinter, which comes with Python. It even includes some support for TTK, which is kind of the newer version of tkinter widgets. And they actually look a little bit better than, like your regular tkinter widgets. If you've ever seen them, they look kind of plain Jane buttons, but with TTK, they look much more native-like. So you can get to those too with PySimpleGUI. It just takes a little extra work. To install PySimpleGUI, it's just a Python, mpip install PySimpleGUI. If you want to use one of the other versions, so like this one here will install tkinter, or install the tkinter wrapper by default. If you want to use Qt instead, you do PySimpleGUI Qt, or PySimpleGUI WX, or Remy, or what have you. So that's how you would do that if you wanted to use one of those other ones. And then let's look at creating a simple app so I can kind of tell you how you can switch between them. So in 2 lines of code, you can create kind of a hello world example. And so if you'd installed something other than PySimpleGUI, like PySimpleGUI Qt or PySimpleGUI WX, you just change this code here, and then you'd have it. I don't have WX installed right now, but You just change this install, and then it would look like you're running Debian Python, or look like you're running Qt. Anyway, so if I run this code, you can see that it creates a little hello world frame, and it doesn't really give you a whole lot. It gives you a title bar and minimize and exit, and that's it. But it kind of shows you the power that is there underneath the covers, and what makes it kind of cool. Let's go ahead and add some more wedges to it to make the GUI look more interesting. So this is more of your typical PySimpleGUI code base. You have what they call a layout, which is a list of lists. And inside that list of lists are the widgets or elements that make up your GUI. So a text widget is like a label. Button is a button. In this case, the button will have an OK label. I'm going to make a window, which will hold the layout. So in this case, we'll have a label and a button on our window. And then with all GUIs, you have to create an event loop, which is basically just an infinite loop that will read from the GUI and say, did the user click a button? Did the user move their mouse? Did the user type something on the keyboard? All of those are events, and you can respond to those events accordingly. In this case, the only events that we care about is the OK event, which happens when you press the OK button, and the when closed event, which happens when you hit the little X on the window. So if we run this, you can see that we have this really tiny little demo, and you may want to make the screen really big so you can see these better, because some of these demos are small. But it just creates this little thing. These are the default font sizes for these widgets. You know, if you've used tkinter or what have you, you can change all of those so that the text is much bigger. But anyway, what I wanted to say is, here we have our list of lists. You can see that this particular list of lists stacks them vertically. So the first one is on the top and the next one is on the bottom. This is kind of important because when you're first learning how to create a GUI, you have to learn, do you absolutely position the widgets on your GUI? Like, do I say I want it at 0.00, which is usually like the top left corner in a GUI, or do I want it in the bottom? Or do I want it to put the widgets on there in a relative position relative to each other? In this case, you don't have to think about that. PySimpleGUI abstracts that away, and it just puts them in there relative to each other all by itself. If you wanted to do that in tkinter, you would use a geometry manager, which, speaking of which, we're going to talk about that. So when you're laying out elements, you have lots of different verbiage to learn. In Debian Python, you lay out elements using sizers. In PyQt or PySide, you use layouts. tkinter uses a geometry manager like grid or pack. And then PySimpleGUI, as you saw earlier, uses lists. So you have nested lists, and that's pretty much all you really need to know to create a GUI. And that just kind of flattens the learning curve a lot in my mind, because once you've learned our list comprehension, you can create a GUI, and that's really cool. So I just wanted to show a couple of different ways to lay out your widgets. We'll start with a horizontal layout using a list comprehension. In this case, I'm just going to create 5 buttons, 1 through 5, and I'll just slap a number on it at the end. And this should create a set of buttons all the way across, 1 through 5. Now, I did mess up in this code. I don't know if you'll notice or not, but none of these buttons actually do anything because I didn't set my event to match any of the button labels. So if I wanted to make that code work, I'd have to put like a 1 in there and rerun it. And then I could probably get it to work the way I wanted to. But anyway, let's close that out. Now let's do a vertical layout. To do a vertical layout, you still do a list of lists, but inside the nested list, you just do one item per list. So this time, it'll stack them all up because there's only one per list. Now, if I wanted to get fancy, I could just add some more code in here and rerun. And let's see, I need to close that other one. And then I rerun it, and you can see that you can just kind of experiment, how many widgets do I want per row? Do I want a combo box? Do I want, an image to show up here? You can just kind of play around with that and just edit the code live and just keep rerunning it and see you build your GUI pretty dynamically that way. For an article I wrote for Real Python, I wanted to create an image viewer. And one of the ways to do that is to use columns. And columns basically just make it easier to organize your widgets or your elements. So if I wanted to have a stack of like vertical widgets on the left and a stack on the right, if you create a list of lists again, like I'm doing here, then I can put them inside of a column and lay it out that way. And it's kind of easier to see if I just run this code and show you what I'm doing, assuming I can get it to work. Sometimes I can get this code to run in here, and sometimes I can't. There we go. All right, so let's look at this. Here's the left column. It's got a label, an input, which is your text input here. Enable events means that when I type in here, events can fire. The key refers to how you interact, how you would access the value that was typed into this text box or this input box. And then folder browse wraps tkinter's folder button, which lets you open up, the browse button on whatever operating system you're on. And then for the right column, I just created a bunch of random buttons because I don't really care. I just wanted to show you how you could lay it out. But the cool thing about using columns is that you can make pretty complex sets of groups of widgets and just make the layout however you want using those columns. And if you combine that with the nested lists of lists, you could have quite the complex layout pretty quickly. Let's see. Okay, so a while ago, I think it was late 2021. No, not late 2021, early 2021. I was working on this book called Pillow Image Processing with Python. And so I come from a WX Python background. That's why I have most of my experience with creating desktop GUIs. And so I was planning to write this book using creating GUIs that would show you how to manipulate images with Python and process them and, apply different effects with Pillow. And I'm like, I can totally do this with WX Python because I have all this experience in it. And I think I wrote the first 5 or 6 chapters using WX Python. And then I had some beta readers reading the book, and they said, hey, you could use PySimpleGUI and you could have the number of lines of code in your book for the GUI examples. And I was like, that's really cool. So I wanted to show that, except now I'm back. Well, we'll just switch over and show you. So I just wanted to show you what the difference is between using like WX Python versus PySimpleGUI, because it really ended up saving me a lot of time explaining kind of the same code over and over again. So let's see. Here on the left, we have some PySimpleGUI code, and on the right, we have some WX Python code. And on the left, you can see, you have a couple of functions. You have the same layout type code that we had before, and it's a little bit more complicated because now I'm responding to events and doing things. But overall, it's a very functional programming approach to creating a GUI. In WX Python land, there's nothing wrong with it. I still love WX Python, but you have to do WX Python with classes and object-oriented programming. And if you want to do it well, you end up with a lot of lines of code. So in this case, I have 160 lines of code for my WX Python version. And for the PySimpleGUI version, I have 84. but functionally they're the same. Let's just load them up. So let's load up this one. So this is my PySimpleGUI application. It just reads XF data from an image if I happen to load one. If I load up the DebX Python one, it's going to look much more like a Mac app because all the buttons and all the widgets follow the native look and feel. Now I could get this same look and feel in PySimpleGUI if I just change that import at the top to be, import PySimpleGUI WX. And it should look very similar to this, except I think I have the widgets laid out a little bit differently in this particular code base. Anyway, the main reason I wanted to mention this is that PySimpleGUI, if you're going to be explaining a GUI to your students, or you just want to introduce the GUI ideas to a student or to a friend, PySimpleGUI will make it a lot easier to explain what's going on, why you might want to use a GUI, and even just get them started. And once they understand how a GUI works and how events work, then you can switch to, DebX Python or PyQt or whatever you need. Okay. So I have several examples of that I wrote about for real Python or on my own blog using PySimpleGUI. Matplotlib is a super popular graphing library in Python. And because it integrates with tkinter and it integrates with DebX Python really well, you can also use it in PySimpleGUI. So let's take a look at an example that does that. So to make this work, and I think this one comes based on a PySimpleGUI demo, actually. You import from Matplotlib. They have different backends. And one of those backends is tk-egg. And in there, it basically tells Matplotlib that you're going to try to draw a graph in tkinter. So since PySimpleGUI is using tkinter by default, we can use this particular tk-egg class and pass it a canvas object and a figure object. So let's go down and figure out what I'm talking about. All right, so draw figure takes our window. That's the little box that you saw earlier with the exit button on it. And you tell it that you're going to pass it an attribute of that window called tk-canvas. And tk-canvas is basically a place to draw on. So you can draw, colors or paint pictures, basically. It's kind of think of it as like Windows Paint in a way. Canvas can display anything on it. And that's why it makes it perfect for drawing like a graph. The figure is Matplotlib's figure. And so you just pass those in and you tell it to draw it. And after a little bit of processing, I don't know why my computer is being slow right now, it'll draw the plot in your GUI, and then you can, check it out. And there's some examples on the PySimpleGUI website that show how to do live plotting and multiple plots all at once. So that's super duper cool, in my opinion. You can just easily do that in such a small amount of code. Yeah, I wanted to show some other examples. I think it's over here on the PySimpleGUI website. Because the examples I have are kind of plain Jane. But if you go to the PySimpleGUI website, you can see where they've done a lot of work and drawn up, logos. Somebody created an Uno game. Somebody created a chess game. tkinter kind of lends itself to doing stuff like this. I think there's a Minesweeper game on here somewhere. They've got a Matplotlib plot test, so you can plot different tests and modify them. I wanted to show how it works with OpenCV, but I think I broke my OpenCV installation on my computer. Otherwise, I'd show you that. But basically, you can use PySimpleGUI plus computer vision and your computer's video, its webcam, to actually apply some like find your face or other algorithms all from PySimpleGUI. And there's a demo. You can go ahead and download it and check it out. But for some reason, I couldn't get it to run on my computer today. I don't know. I probably botched a dependency somewhere. One cool thing that was recently added is a bunch of 32 new color themes. So you can just change the themes in your GUI with like sg.theme, and you give it the name and you can change it a whole bunch of different ways. But yeah, if you go scrolling through here, you can see he's got all kinds of cool examples of what you can do with PySimpleGUI. And if you go to the demos, which is part of the GitHub repo, a lot of these, I think there's like 100 demos or more in here. They just show you how to do like media players, the matplotlib stuff. It has integration with Pygame, all kinds of stuff. It's totally worth your time to go in there and just like download the examples and try them out. I definitely check out the newer ones. Some of these are a little bit older, but overall, the maintainers of PySimpleGUI have done a really good job of making sure everything is backwards compatible. So they rarely break things. There are a couple of like minor bugs on Macs that I've seen. I think that's probably their least well-supported operating system, but the user base for PySimpleGUI isn't very big for Macs.